Hey, welcome to the Military Wallet YouTube channel and podcast. Today's guest is Kayla Corbitt, the founder and CEO of Operation Childcare Project, a national 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to helping military families gain access to safe, affordable, and reliable childcare. As a military spouse, advocate, and nationally recognized expert on military childcare challenges, Kayla has worked extensively to raise awareness about the gaps military families face when trying to secure quality childcare during PCS moves, deployments, training schedules, and everyday military life. Kayla, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. And this is a great topic because, people always say if the military wanted you to have a family, they would have issued you one. But the reality is, I joined the military when I was young. I didn't have a family. I didn't have a family when I was on active duty. So I didn't go through all these challenges, but I saw a lot of my fellow service members struggle with dealing with childcare, working different schedules, nights, weekends, holidays, deployments. It can be a lot to handle. So if you could, would you please introduce yourself a little bit beyond what I did? Tell us a little bit about Operation Childcare Project, and then we'll kind of talk about some of the solutions for childcare.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. You're right on the money there. There is a breadth of lived experience, whether you went through it or not. Everybody kind of sees it. So I am a military spouse, Army spouse. I have two littles of my own. And I think one of the lesser known facts is that I actually started all of this work far before I had children of my own. So it wasn't necessarily a lived experience type of situation, but that certainly helped as it went along. So Operation Childcare Project really offers, its predominant offering is case management. So helping families understand their full suite of childcare options. So not just what's on base or not just what's off base, but kind of how do you mash those together to really fit what military life actually needs, both during the active duty transition and post time. We, instead of listing all the different demographics that we serve, what we like to say is that if you serve the mission, we'll serve you, because that really is very broad. We do hear from veteran spouses, people who are divorced, DoD civilians, contractors. Like, it's a very full gamut that really makes that mission work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love that. If you serve the mission, we serve you. And it's true, a lot of people do serve in the military who, they might be contractors, DoD employees. I'm in the Guard, and I'm the traditional drill status guardsman, meaning I do the traditional 1 week
Yeah.
in a month, 2 weeks a year. And some Guard units do have childcare over the weekends. Not all of them do. It's really case by case. So, so you started this before you had littles of your own. What led you to start Operation Childcare Project, and what has this done for you as an individual and for your family?
I would say idle time is how I started it. It was the work started far before the organization did. On my first duty station, I didn't grow up in military. So when I met my spouse, our first duty station together was Oconus. So it was in Italy, which I joke that's where careers go to die for military spouses, but it's fine. I had so much free time and I had just finished graduate school and I was looking around at the other spouses who were working because, student loans. And I was shocked that no one working had children. The very few who did have children, they were all older. And so in my mind, I was trying to figure out what benefit is the military offering to families where no one has to pay their student loans or car loans or anything like that. And I realized that I was asking the wrong question after talking to a few families. And the reality was that if you needed childcare, the chances of getting employment were non-existent, which just didn't really line up with what at the time I still very much consider myself an outsider. Outsiders are told about how military family support works. I very much thought everyone just got free childcare, whether you really needed it or not, if you were a military family. And so kind of having to put those things together in my mind, I started doing some research on how the programs work. I read policy, something I was pretty good at, and started in that idle time kind of assisting other families with children. This is kind of how this process works. I worked at a few positions at that time. One of them was in like the Military Family Readiness Center. So while I had families there before they would PCS back to the States, I say, hey, just so you know, these programs are also available, even though they weren't technically in my purview to be telling families about. And then I did eventually have a child right before we moved back to the US. I had employment lined up. I was very excited to get back into the swing of things. And then the program that I had been coaching families on for years didn't work. I didn't understand how that's possible. And I was told, I didn't do it the correct way, but I did it the way the policy said. And I realized that if I couldn't do this after having studied this for years, there's no way that families who are just stepping into it for the first time can navigate this successfully. And so that really is what launched that work after I got back and got settled and kind of got through a little bit of that period of maybe a little bit of hostility, if I'm being honest, Ryan. I then decided to create the organization.
Yeah, well, I can understand that. I was active duty and I left active duty. I then got married. I became a military spouse. And you would think somebody who was active duty for, 6+ years would understand, okay, here's how you handle benefits as a military spouse. I had no clue. I didn't know what to do, who to talk to. And you would think somebody who was on the inside could figure it out. But military programs are complicated. And I don't think it's intentional. I just think that they're created in their own little silos and they don't talk well to each other. And they're not designed to work with other programs. They're often just band-aids. We need to fix this. We need to create this now. And these things start piling up and they become very complicated. So I can understand your frustrations. I dealt with them myself. And I still, even to this day, sometimes I have to ask, how do I do this again? And I've been in the military now for almost 19 years, counting active and guard time. So I completely understand where you're coming from. But that highlights how challenging it must be for that new E2, E3 who's coming in, marries into the military, has never experienced any of this, to try to navigate this. And on top of this, you have littles of your own. You may have, maybe it's a newborn on the way. Maybe you married, you already had kids when you join the military as part of your family, but it's a very complicated system. So can you give us a broad overview of some of the programs the military has for childcare? Now, I know it'll vary by branch, especially the names, like they might have similar programs, but can you talk to us a little bit about, let's say I joined, I'm at my first duty installation. It's a fairly large base that operates 24 hours a day, right? So let's use that kind of big picture and start from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is interesting here is that this is very much like the space that my organization really specializes in, is because what we learned was that just because a program exists doesn't mean it's the right fit for you. And so when we're looking at arguably the most expensive thing that any family will have to pay for, now overtaking mortgages in college, we want to make sure that we are not burning finances or effort or time on something that is not going to work out for our family. And so a lot of what we do is, here's the program and this is who it is good for. This is who I would direct towards this. So when it comes to, we basically break it down to Department of Defense operated programs and then civilian operated programs. And so when we're looking at our Department of Defense operated programs, that's going to be your CDCs on the installation, and then your FCC's family childcare, who are DoD certified to operate. So they're not licensed by the state. Those are good for those who are living on the installation. So those who are, again, usually our junior enlisted is who we see being able to leverage those, because they do have they have a lower cost. They are fairly aligned to what the income is. And so those are usually good programs for families on the installation who need that who can't afford anything really over that extra cost. The downfall of those is that they have been reducing hours. So it can be really tricky when it comes to FCC, since they have such low ratios that they can take children in for. So we, again, will look at how many children do you have, because the chance of getting all of your children logistically into the same location is ideal. But maybe that is not something FCC can do, and they're really the only ones that have those kind of extended hours. And so if you do need care outside of those traditional hours, let me take a step back. Let's say that this is someone living off the installation. Also E2. They're living off the installation, then we're not really recommending installation-based care unless it is a financial factor. In that case, we're going to start looking at the fee assistance program. So the military childcare in your neighborhood is what it's called, MCCYN. And this is available to every branch. And they're doing a little bit of reorgs, but the gist of it is that it is a reimbursement program. So if you opt for a approved provider or qualified provider, you enroll your children, you submit a bunch of paperwork, and your provider will start getting reimbursements. It's a formula that's done based on what you would normally pay at the CDC, and there's a rate cap. And we have a whole calculator for it on our website so people can kind of play with numbers and say, does this actually work for my family? But that, again, is a reimbursement. So if you live off the installation, we do generally recommend not doing installation-based care for a handful of reasons. Logistics is a big one. So if you have a spouse who is doing your drop-off and pickup, going on to the installation and off the installation can be a bit of a nightmare, especially if we shut down a gate or there's a drill. And childcare doesn't stay open for you, so it doesn't always work that way. But we also have to look at the cost. So one of the downfalls of the fee assistance program is that it is a reimbursement model. And, depending on branch, we are looking at wait times to get through the application process of anywhere from a couple of weeks to up to 8 months. And since the only programs that qualify on their face for this program are nationally accredited centers, they are arguably the most expensive care in any given city that families are paying the full cost for. So you're looking at somewhere between, let's assume, two children. We are looking at probably between $1,400 to $2,500 per child per month out of pocket while waiting on those reimbursements to start coming in. And when they do come in, they go to the provider. They don't go to the family. The provider is crediting that account. And so that's also something we look at. Does this family have the financial ability to front this money, knowing they're not going to be the ones getting it back, that it's going to end up going in as a credit? Sometimes in those situations, it is better to look at your civilian-based programs. So we start looking at things like your local Head Start, your preschool pre-K programs. When we have special needs children, we start looking at, can we leverage an IEP? Because you can start that when you're 3. Can we start? Yeah. And then you don't pay for it. So we start looking at, can we start leveraging things like that? Is it a friends, family, neighbor situation? And this is especially true on and off base when we do look at those kind of 24-hour programs, or swing shift or Panama schedules or whatever it is that you have coming up that doesn't fit any traditional schedule care, which is the vast majority of military families. How do you put together your team in a way that you effectively leverage what subsidized care is available and then also this private area? There's one additional program that the military offers. It's called the Childcare in Your Home program. There's a lot of misconceptions around this program. What I would say is who we recommend it to is generally dual officer families with more than 2 children under the age of 5 who were going to be paying a full-time caregiver, private caregiver anyway. That is who that is good for, because it has an even longer onboarding time and even fewer slots. And there are a lot of pieces that come with that. So we do get a lot of junior enlisted families reaching out saying, oh, I want the CCYH program. It pays for a nanny, right? That's what it does. But the reality is that nanny care is the most expensive care. So it's really only most cost effective for families who have multiple children under the age of 5, who already need extended long hours or overnight hours, and who have the financial backing to front all of that money in labor over an extended period of time.
Yeah. So it sounds like really there are multiple options and there's no one size fits all. So
No.
for that brand new person to the military, whether you're officer or enlisted, it really every situation needs its own, almost like an advisor for somebody to sit down, because it sounds like to try to navigate it on your own is very complicated, and it's not something I can just go to the base services website and say, okay, this is the option. I'm going to click on this, sign my child up, and next week I have childcare. It sounds like there are on base options, off base options, potential wait lists, different hours and schedules. And the military, we have different operational needs. I was aircraft maintenance when I was on active duty. So we worked 3 shifts
Mhm.
around the clock. And, it was usually 10-hour days. Sometimes it was weekends. Sometimes it was 12s because that's what we had. And then I deployed a lot, and I was enlisted for 6 years. I had 5 deployments. So this is not uncommon for certain career fields. When we're looking at these options for childcare, can we just take a step back and say, okay, look, there are 2 options on base, there are some off base options, and kind of talk just top level pros and cons so that somebody who's being introduced to childcare for military families has just a rough idea of what are we looking at and how can we just get an idea of these. We'll just kind of take a step back.
Yeah, you're right. It is just so incredibly nuanced. It is so nuanced. And I think when it, some top line pros and cons, I would say for installation based care, the pros are the cost is lower. The pro is that logistically it's close if you're living on the installation. The con is that it is priority based. So what that means is that if you are not a single service member or you're not dual mill, the chances of you getting in to one of those slots in any sort of timely fashion is pretty low. Then we have to also look at a con of hours. As they've really struggled with staffing, that's been a consistent issue over the years. They reduce hours to alleviate some of that stress. And so as a result, a con is it doesn't really fit military schedules. We're seeing CDCs close as early as 5 p.m. now, and that just doesn't really align with military life. The pros of an FCC, so the family child care home, on the installation is that they can flex more. So they can do later hours. They could do overnight weekends. That is very much up to them. And it is another pro is that is subsidized. And so it's usually capped. There's a number of factors there. Another pro of that is that it's smaller. So it is more intimate. It is good for families whose children might need a little extra attention or families who haven't used care before. The con is it's one person. So heaven forbid they get sick. They want to take a vacation. They need to take their own kids somewhere. Like there's a lot of factors there. Or they move. They PCS. So it's not necessarily the most predictable form of care when it comes to that. And so you're going to have to come up with backups. When we're looking at the off-base care, I would say that could be broken down into kind of 2 different categories. One is, are you using the off-base care with the fee assistance? Or are you using the off-base care with no assistance, like entirely on your own? So the pros of the one with the fee assistance is fee assistance. There's a potential for, some financial support when it
That's always
comes
helpful.
to,
Yes.
right. Yeah. The wait list, the pro of that is like the wait list for the fee assistance program is nil. That is really good for those who do have a working spouse, a student spouse, someone looking for work. There's exceptions to policy for pretty much everything within that process. So that is a pro for that form of care. The con is that national accreditation piece and kind of that pushback, the amount of time it takes a family to navigate that process and really understanding how to do it, which can get very overwhelming. Another con is the upfront costs of that program. And then you do have an ongoing administrative lift that you have to do because you have to continually sending new documents, get new pay stubs, new signatures, and wait for updated certificates to come through. So there's a I'd say a bit of a stressor on that. If you are using off-base care without the fee assistance, though, the pro of that is it really does open up your options. So you no longer need to only go to the most expensive centers in any given area. You can still go to high quality licensed providers who probably will be willing to flex to what you need because they're not under such a high scrutiny there. A lot of times that allows families to do more in-home licensed care, again, who can offer more flexible hours, more weekends. It is more homey. One of the big pros of the civilian-based care is consistency, if I'm being honest, when it comes to who is caring for your child. This is especially important with military families because military children experience so much inconsistency, a lot of moving parts. And this is true of any major childcare center, any on-base provider, is that there's a lot of turnover, there's a lot of rolling, there's a lot of moving. And so sometimes that stability of that civilian provider, someone who's been there for a long time, is very much what fits a family's needs. I'd say the last large bucket is really your non-traditional forms of care. The nannies, those have to be household employees. They are not 1099. They have to be household employees. And so the con of that is that the family needs to become a household employer. They need to understand their state's laws. They usually have to understand payroll. It's very expensive. Those are kind of the cons. The pros is they're your employee. So you do get to flex them in really any way that you guys have agreed upon. So we have families who use nannies to help with the other household aspects that you don't really think about until you have someone who's deployed a lot. So can you help me with grocery shopping? Can you do transportation for my children? Can you drop my child off at this appointment and I'll meet you there? Those are all pieces where you essentially get to purchase, someone to help you be another parent. The au pairs, a lot of military families talk about au pairs. And the pros to that is it is more cost effective than a nanny. The con being that they cannot be, you have to give them their own room. There's a lot of rules and regulations around it. So sometimes you're limited by space and they can't be the primary adult responsible overnight. So if you do have overnight operations, weekends, deployments, where they will be the only person with the child, that's unfortunately against the rules. And then that's an area where really like your trusted caregivers, your friends, your family, your neighbors step in. Pros, flexible. They're only really accountable to you. So that makes it much easier. The con is navigating that. So you have to find them. And that's really difficult for military families. Then you have to know how to vet them. Where can you get resources and knowing like who is a good caregiver and who's not a good caregiver when you don't have the state telling you how that works. So there's pros and cons really to all of it. And I would say that when it comes to military family needs, childcare needs to be viewed more as a menu and less as this or that. It's not a binary. It very rarely have we seen any family leverage just one form. Usually they are taking 2 or 3 forms at a time and piecing them together, whether they recognize they're doing that or not.
Yeah, that makes sense though, because a lot of military families have moving parts, whether it's their schedule, if it's dual military, whether or not they have family or close friends in the area that they trust to watch their children. So I can completely understand that. One of the things I'd like to touch on, right at the end, you just mentioned about vetting providers. And so can you talk a little bit about how military members and families can evaluate the safety and the quality and the licensing perhaps of the care that they're receiving beyond just a quick Google search? Like, do they have Google reviews, right? So what should a military family look for?
That is an excellent question. And that again is going to vary by what are you doing? But we'll stick top line here. We'll say military operated, civilian operated, and trusted caregivers. So in our military operated, a lot of families don't know that military operated programs are not actually licensed programs. So they're what we call DoD certified programs. They still get inspected, but it is from kind of within. And so when we have families who want to use a CDC or an FCC, What we tell them is you have to visit. You have to go tour it. You can go ahead and sign up. Everyone starts every military program at militarychildcare.com. That is the start point for everyone. You have to go on there, you have to apply. But after you do that, before you enroll, go look at it. You need to look at how are the staff interacting with each other? How does the director interact with the staff? I mean, look for that like eye contact as they enter and leave rooms. Does it seem like it's a friendly, cordial environment? Look at the children. You can, while they're not inspected by the state, so there's no public inspection reports, they have those at the front desk. So you can ask to see that. You can ask to see, can I see the inspection reports? And ask to see the one for the year prior as well, and see like have things change from year to year. Like that is all really helpful. And we keep a list of interview questions to ask anyone on our website. That's really good for those who are navigating this for the first time. When it comes to off-base providers, so these licensed civilians centers providers, we actually do recommend Google reviews. We always caveat that with it's probably going to be the angriest people who have left this.
That's fair. Yeah.
Look at what their level of anger is generally what I say. You know, sometimes you see these 1-star reviews and they say something like, they wouldn't let me have cloth diapers with my child. That's like a decent, that's an okay, to me, an okay, like negative review. It's not like they threw my child down a hallway, you know? So when it comes to like anger, like I feel like that's an acceptable level of anger. Like where I personally, since that's not a ride or die for me with the cloth diapers, wouldn't be like, all right, well, you know, this is feasible. But you can look at it. Every state has public licensing. So you look up the license of the provider and you can look at 2 different things. They will be called something different based on state. Never discount a provider that is off base just because they have a violation. You know, I had a child at a center once, they got a violation because they didn't update the date on the dry erase board in the classroom. So it had the last week's date and not this week's date on it. And so not all violations are the same. You need to actually look at the violation. Is it an upturned rug corner? Was it a bottle of bleach in the toddler area? Like what was the actual violation, and kind of weigh that.
Yep,
It's not the
that's
same.
totally fair, right? Yeah. So I can understand giving somebody a pass for not updating a date on a dry erase board, chalkboard, etc. So
Totally.
definitely good advice there. So when we've done that vetting and we're saying, okay, we're good with this company, maybe we interview the director, or we've toured the location. I know when we put our daughter in childcare, we did that. We toured the location, and my wife did a lot of reviews. And at the end of the day, it was about her feeling comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And we started off with a couple of days a week. It wasn't something we needed day to day for, drop her off in the morning to work, pick her up on the way back. So we were able to ease into that, and that made my wife a little more comfortable with that. Same with me, made
Yes.
us more comfortable with that. So now that we've done that and we've got our child in childcare, we're navigating that process. How do we handle some of the curveballs that come with military life? So, military, look, we have frequent PCS moves. So, we have to do the process all over again. Deployments, TDYs, shift work, unpredictable schedules, dual military families, single parents. What are some of the things we can do to, obviously I just threw a whole bunch at you.
Okay.
So let's start with a little bit. Maybe we start with the first, and that might just be shift work or unpredictable schedules. And then we can move into things like deployments or things like that.
Yeah, the unpredictable schedules, and I this is so important, and it's going to make some people really uncomfortable. You have to talk to people. We talk to our introverts a lot. I myself am not a go out and chat with my neighbors kind of person, but you don't really have a choice when you have children and you're in a military family. So we recommend, we call it safety planning for families, but it's very similar to basically just building your team. So we talk about when you do, in your example, you have your child in this center now, and you like this center, you're enjoying it, you trust them. This is an area that you can then start building your team. So now when you go in the morning, start asking your child's teacher just some little friendly questions. Hey, what do you do on the weekends? Is this the only job that you have? Do you have a family? Do you have kids yourself? Like little personal questions to start building that rapport. The most underlooked person in any given center or school is the front desk staff. Those are people who went through the same kind of background checks, vetting as everybody else, but they're probably a little less burned out on helping with kids. So those are the people you want to engage on your way in. How's your spouse? You see a photo of their dog on the counter. What's your dog's name? Build that relationship, because it makes it so much easier when there is a situation when unpredictable. We are so unpredictable of like, man, you swing by after you've built that reputation and been like, or that relationship and say, I just have to find someone to help me just for 2 weekends in the next month. And I just cannot figure out who that could be because I'm new here, but you've built that relationship. So even if that person can't help you, those people are usually stable and they know people. And that's really where you start to build that team. You start to figure out what relationships actually exist that you didn't think really existed. And more often than not, we find that people have a larger team than they thought. And that kind of referral point, because this is someone you trust, and then they're either with you or they're telling you about someone they trust, that helps you build that team a lot faster to step in those situations.
Yeah, that's a great advice. I think if you also get to the point where you're arriving and dropping off your children at the same time, you probably see a lot of the same parents over and over
Now
again.
you got it.
So those would be people that you could introduce yourself to and maybe drop a little line. Well, what is your family situation? Or XYZ might be, hey, I've seen you around. Drop that line, maybe go get a coffee if you have a chance, or get
Mm-hmm.
to know them somehow. Even if you haven't gotten to that coffee stage, they still might have a babysitter or somebody that they could refer you to, or things along those lines. So that's, I think, great advice there. I love that a lot. So now we're talking shift work, unpredictable schedules. Now, TDYs and deployments, those change the calculus a lot, because now you might be going from and we could also look at this as a single parent
Mm-hmm.
household, but you're going from potentially a 2-parent household to a 1-parent household, and it could be anywhere from a week to 6 months. How do you handle that? And what is the most, obviously every situation is different, but do you have some advice to help military families navigate those times?
This is where I highly recommend an upfront investment. You don't have the privilege of being shy anymore. So when you know that something like this is going to happen, you start with basically a spray of outreach. You start hitting your military family readiness centers. You say, what resources are available to me? What support groups are there? Is there a team chat or group chat that I could get in of other families whose spouses are going on this TDY? Can you connect me with other families whose spouses are going on this deployment? Even if you don't actually, your goal here is not necessarily, perhaps maybe it is, to have friends. It is to build a network. Your goal here is to have multiple people that you could rely on. We do start at this point asking families if they've never contacted their FRG or depending on your branch, your readiness connection, that this is the time to build that. This is the time to at least get your name out there, start talking about your children. We also recommend that we start level setting with our family. So figure out what family realistically could be available if we had to have them. And use those for our pinch points. So we do a lot of how do we get safety right now while we work on a long-term option. So sure, mom might not be able to come fly in because mom has a job and mom lives states away. She probably can't fly in for an 8-month deployment. Could she fly in for 3 weeks? Could we do 3 weeks just to buy you enough mental space and time to figure out like, what is my next step? So we do, a lot of times you get lost in the sauce here when you start thinking about like, but there's no one who could ever step in to help me for all 8 months of this. And so we like to break that down. What is the immediate? What can we do immediately to bring that safety piece? And then plan out from there based on the resources available. One thing that we talk about in a pinch and an emergency, and we've seen this a few times, where someone does have, a spouse behind who is caring for the children, but they planned no one else. Like that was it. And now the spouse has something. we unfortunately see a good bit of time that the spouse is going through some sort of mental health crisis themselves. And so who did they then turn to? We have we have a program, but it's only it's called Homefront Help that can step in emergencies, but that's only in 2 locations in the US. And so in all of those other times, what we recommend that families do when we do hear from them is, who are your neighbors? Even if you don't know them that well, are there ways we can make that safer? And so we talk about, and that will go down to, can your children talk? Can they not talk? If your children can talk, can you talk to that child and say, hey, X neighbor is going to come over and help you for the next few hours while we wait on this person to come over. If you feel uncomfortable, I want you to go out and knock on this neighbor's door. And then you call that neighbor ahead of time and you say, hey, if my kid comes to knock on the door, I'm leaving them with the new sitter, never left them with before. Can you help in that situation? Just and reach out to me. Like, there's a lot of different pieces that we can do when it comes to that safety planning. Ideally, we want everyone doing proactive outreach to your kid's school secretary, to the neighbors that drop off. This is a little unhinged, but it does work, I have to say. If you do have a small child and you want to get to know some other parents, but you're feeling like you can't broach that topic, like you're feeling a little anxious, you don't really want to be the one to reach out and say, hey, can you spend some time with me so you can watch my kids at some point? Take a picture your kid is drawn and then write, my kid thought you'd like this. And then want to have a play date on the back, and you put it in that kid's cubby or backpack. Because what I'll tell you is the 2-year-olds don't notice, but it does get you then in touch with the parent in a child forward way. It has worked 100% of the time, every time. And I've given that advice to hundreds of people.
I think first of all, I love that, right? But most people, I think, are seeking connection in some way. And it's hard for some people to take that first step and say, you know what, I would love to have another mother, father, friend, somebody I can hang out with, get our kids together because my kids need to socialize outside of that daycare/school environment, right? So it's good just to have that free, unstructured playtime for kids, but it's also great for adults. So any way I think you can facilitate that, I think is good, but doing that from the child's perspective completely puts the guard down and just makes it sure, my kid wants it. Let me do this for my kid. Whilst inside, many adults are feeling like, yes, I kind of need this too. So I love that. And I think all of us are seeking just a little bit more of that personal connection. So those are all wonderful tips. I know my children are a little older now. They're in their teens. My last deployment, they were teen. Just was she? Yeah, I guess my youngest was. She's a preteen, but my wife didn't have that network locally. So even though my kids were able to do a lot themselves, it was still stressful for my wife to run everywhere and do all the trips and all the logistics that it comes with running a household. And I think having somebody else to meet up with every now and then just would have been a huge help for her. And I know most spouses and even service members would feel the same way. When we're looking at some of these programs that are out there, we'll kind of switch gears a little bit. We did talk about some of the off-care reimbursement programs and things like that. You did mention a few other things, such as the My Childcare in Your Neighborhood. Can you talk a little bit about some of these military childcare assistance programs? Maybe if they offer fee assistance or the childcare in your neighborhood, or are there any state level programs or subsidies or tax benefits or things that people can be looking for that can help them make childcare a little more affordable, whether it's at the reimbursement level, the tax level, whatever programs there might be?
Yeah, I'll say that one of the most under discussed expenses when it comes to childcare is actually school aged care for summers. Summer based care is a mortgage and a half. It is so much money for such a short period of time. But when you do have children in that in between area, which a lot of families do, of the 5 to 12, where you can't really leave them home alone all summer, It is so much money. So that is an area that we tell families to leverage the dependent care flex spending account that has recently become available to military families. It works so beautifully, and I wish that more programs operated in the way that it does, where it comes out of your check before it gets to you, it's pre-tax, and the reimbursement is so fast. It is you can't submit it until after you pay for the care. So I'd say the caveat here is most summer camps, if you haven't signed up for them by February, you don't stand a chance. So you are prepaying for a good bit of those. But the moment that that care is offered, you can send a photo of the invoice in, and that deposit is in your account usually within the week. And so you basically get fully reimbursed. It's up to 7,500 a year right now, which is amazing for summer care because so many programs don't cover any form of subsidized summer care. Even the fee assistance programs are very touchy on that. The other aspects I would say are UPK, so Universal Preschool Pre-K. Those are free because they're run by the state. Generally, it is a certain number of hours, but the way that it offsets cost has been incredible. So some families will say, I'll use my own as an example. I have a child still in childcare, and he became eligible for pre-K this last year. And so it's only 15 hours a week. And so sometimes when families hear, oh, 15 hours a week, like I need 40 something hours a week. What's the point in doing that? It dropped my weekly rate from 240 a week to 160.
Wow, that's huge. Yeah.
Yes. Massive change. And when you have more than one child in care, like that is incredible. And so being able to leverage and piece a few programs together, and I didn't have to change providers. A lot of providers now qualify, like regular providers, it's not always in a school, qualify for that. That being said, school-based programs are being slipped on as well. Schools, public schools, charter schools are expanding what they're offering. It's no longer just K through 12. They are dropping into that preschool, pre-K. Sometimes it's only part day. A lot of times it's only part day. But again, this is where that networking helps. Like if maybe you're doing a share at this point in time with another family because that family actually needs more care than what they have there. So maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays, they take the children after school. You take them Thursday, Fridays after school. And that becomes kind of a share if you have that, capability. So there are ways to offset with your state programs. There are a lot of, this would probably really be more applicable to the veteran community. There are state programs, but they're income-based. Since most include BAH, it really knocks most military families out of the running. But there are subsidized care programs through the state and sometimes even at the county level that will also offset the cost of your care. Head Start's free in most states as well. So that's really helpful if you have a child on an IEP or special needs or English is your second language. So like there's a lot of aspects there that you can leverage. Most community programs, military families miss out on entirely because they don't know they're there to look for. And so I always recommend if you're not going to reach out to us to navigate those for you, please reach out to your local county. Every county has a child care resource and referral, and they can tell you all of the programs that are available there that you can leverage. And there's no such thing as double dipping because these are all different buckets of money. So you can use your military operated care and subsidies. You can use your state ones. You can use the federal ones, and you can put them all together.
I think that's wonderful. And, as we talked about at the very beginning of this podcast is there are so many programs and it does take kind of a patchwork to figure out the best solution. No one size fits all. So I really love the work that you're doing in this area. Can you talk a little bit about Operation Childcare Project and how you talked a little bit about how you started. What are some of the services that you offer to the military community? And well, you also mentioned sometimes it's civilian and just kind of that military community at large. What are some of the things that you offer through your organization and who are you really trying to impact and reach?
Yeah, so we offer predominantly it's our case management. So everything really stems out from there. So this is one-on-one case management. You get assigned a case manager when you come in, and we really get the full gambit. So we get people in an emergency who say, I need care next week. And then we get people who say, I'm pregnant and I feel overwhelmed already. And so those are the ones we love to get because that's easier to plan ahead, and really give all of the information. It's really about education and support. We at no time are telling you you should be doing this or you have to do this. We're here to present you with the information in a really digestible way of these are your feasible options based on what you've said. What would you like to do moving forward? And then we support them in the life cycle of that. So if they look at all their options and they go, you know what, actually, I can't afford any of those. I think I'm going to have to find a neighbor to help on these days. We go, great. Let us help you navigate that. This is how you have those conversations. This is how the questions you should ask. These are the safety things that you can do in the interim. And so that's a lot of the case management. What we recognized in that, though, was how many families needed trusted caregivers, and they didn't have them. They don't have friends, family, or neighbors. And so we also have a program called Homefront Help. So this is in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and in the Fort Walton Beach area of Florida, where we take community members. So the people on these Facebook groups who are responding to the families, military families, when they say, I have $50 and I need someone to watch my kid this Saturday. We are reaching out to those who are responding, saying that they will help. And we are offering them free safety training, planning, child development training, and we're actually paying them to take it. They also get free level 2 fingerprint background checks, all of these things. The idea is that we, in offering this in heavy military communities, are creating safer caregiver options for everyone. And it becomes a win-win because now we have kind of a vetted, we do the background checks and stuff, list of safer caregivers. So when families in those areas do come into case management and they say, yeah, I just really need someone to help with my kid, dropping my kid off at school for the next 4 weeks, and I have no one to turn to, we can send that out to all of those people who took that training and say, can any of you step in to help this family? And then we do have grants available to help with the financial cost of that, since we're not a nanny agency and they're not ours. We can't tell them what to charge. So if they charge more than the family can afford, we can help with that. The other side is that if you do have a trusted caregiver that you want to use, but they're not a helper, we also offer free instant background checks. And so that's to anybody. So if you do find someone on Facebook or your neighbor and you think, I just really wish I knew if they had committed a felony in the last 2 years, that would make me feel so much safer. That is something that we will cover the cost of and really facilitate for families. So we're really here to support them in what they want to do and to lift a lot of that burden off. Because while there are a ton of resources, it's also incredibly exhausting to figure out which ones actually work for me, which ones actually do what they say they do. And that's really where we fit.
I think that's wonderful. This is such a complicated but important topic for so many military families. And look, when it comes down to it, military life is very demanding. We work different schedules, we work different operations tempos, we deploy, we go TDY, and finding childcare is something that is essential for us to be able to perform that mission. So I want to ask you if you can give us a couple of gaps that you see in the military childcare community, and then leave us with something that you see as hopeful and some of the things that you've seen that have changed maybe in the last few years that really show how things are progressing in this space.
So the gaps are becoming definitely more evident over the years. You know, you mentioned when you were in that you were junior, you were enlisted, you were junior enlisted, you were young. I think that's where most of the families, most families are a little bit, they used to be a little bit opposite of you, right? Everyone had children very young. And so while it was still an issue then, a predominant issue, this isn't a new issue. It's become a lot more visible right now. And I think that's because people are having children later. And so now we're having O1s, O2s, O3s be the ones who reach out to us and say, how do I do this? I don't understand. And so it's not just like an enlisted side thing. They're there for a couple of months. The predominant people coming into our case management were O4s, where they were navigating this for the first time and they didn't really understand how any of the systems worked. And I think that that's really one of the major gaps is it's confusing and it's overwhelming. And you're asking families in times of turmoil and chaos to figure this out. And then they don't have the bandwidth to stick with it. And so a lot of times what we see is that those families kind of disappear from the table where they're getting care, they're getting support, but it may not be the care that they wanted, the support that they needed, or that their children needed. And so I think that we need to be more holistic. That is a gap about the reality of what families are facing and adjust programs according to that. We still very much see the focus of childcare being on childcare centers. And it probably, well, I know it surprises people based on their face when I say it, but over 80% of children in the US are cared for by what we consider to be trusted caregivers, friends, family, neighbors. They are outside of this system, but we continue to build systems that they're just not going to be sustainable long term. You will never build enough centers or have enough staff in those centers for every child to step into. So the gap is very much still that it's very complex, not binary, not easy, and we're still heading in the direction of how do we focus on centers only. What makes me hopeful about the last few years is that it is more visible. You know, this was kind of an uphill battle for a while of this is not a me problem. This is people who had small children problem. But what we're seeing is that it is an everyone problem. Like this affects our economy. It affects our workforce. It affects the safety and development of the next generation who's going to care for us when we're old. It impacts everyone, whether you like it or not. And I have been very hopeful in seeing a lot of shifts in mindsets around that. So I started seeing, for example, here in Colorado Springs, there's this thing called the Family Friendly Initiative. And we have contract construction developers in this group on childcare, where they're talking about how can we look at tax breaks? How can we look at building childcare options into apartment buildings? How can we look at ways to incorporate more childcare, recognizing everyone's going to have to do something for the betterment of everyone? And I think that that gives me a lot of hope because we are starting to look at it more as the community good that it is, rather than this service that some people occasionally need.
I think that's a very fair assessment. As you said, this impacts everybody in the military. Even if you don't have kids, it affects retention. It affects recruiting. It affects your coworker or fellow service member's ability to get to work, to deploy. I've known people who have had to drop out of deployments last minutes because of family care issues and things like that. So it's a readiness and a retention issue. So thank you for bringing all of this attention to military childcare. I'm sure this will be a wonderful resource for so many military members and their families. Can you tell us where people can find your website and how they can connect with you so they can learn more or learn how they might be able to potentially be somebody who helps with advocacy or maybe providing childcare for another, friend or fellow service member?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're trying very hard to make sure everything stays on the website, occproject.org. Short, of course, for operationchildcareproject.org. And so that is where you can find our case management services. So you can request free case management there. If you're interested in if you're in a home front help pilot area, you want to request a helper, you want to be a helper, you want to do the paid training. You can also find that on our website. You can sign up or send out a care request from the website. Our eligibility calculator, what programs are you eligible for? That is something we're going to keep iterating. Right now, it'll give you all your military operated programs, but we're going to start adding in all your local civilian programs as well. So if you want to do kind of a self-service, quick snapshot of what is available in my area based on my family demographic, then you can use that. It is on our website right next to the fee assistance calculator, where you can kind of figure out, do I have the budget for this, and really simplify that down. So everything could be found right there at occproject.org.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Kayla. I appreciate you coming on to the show today. Thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge. For everybody who's listening, this was Kayla Corbitt from Operation Childcare Project. Thank you for joining us, and
Thank
thank you
you.
for your service.